In 1968, in a courtyard outside Guangzhou, a man who had spent 20 years training in isolation stepped forward. He told Bruce Lee he would be on the ground in 3 seconds. Lee didn't argue. He didn't posture. He simply waited. What happened next wasn't captured on film, but every person who stood in that courtyard carried the same story for the rest of their lives. And 40 years later, when researchers tried to verify the details, they found something unusual. No one disagreed on what they saw. Not once. Guangzhou, 1968. The Cultural Revolution had been tearing through China for 2 years. Temples were being dismantled. Martial arts schools were considered feudalism. Masters went underground or disappeared. But some traditions don't vanish. They adapt. In the hills north of the city, a network of former Shaolin monks continued to operate in secret. They met in basements, in courtyards, behind locked gates. They trained in silence. And they protected the few remaining elders who still carried the old knowledge. Among them was a man the students called Lao Shi, teacher. He was 52 years old. He had entered Shaolin as a child in the 1920s. His body had been shaped by 2 decades of repetition horse stance until the legs stopped shaking, striking wooden posts until the knuckles stopped bleeding. By 1968, he had spent 20 years as what some called an enforcer. His role was simple. If someone came looking for the temple's elders or tried to challenge the lineage, Lao Shi met them first, one exchange. If they survived it with structure intact, he would talk. If they didn't, they left. No one had ever survived it. That summer, word began to spread that Bruce Lee was in Hong Kong, that he might be traveling to Guangzhou to meet with a translator and scriptwriter. To the traditional masters, Lee was a performer. He had left Hong Kong, gone to America, taught non-Chinese students, appeared on television. This was not martial arts, this was marketing. But Lao Shi saw an opportunity. He believed that Hollywood, no matter how skilled, could not touch the kind of discipline that came from decades inside a system that erased you until only the technique remained. He began asking questions. Within 3 days, he knew the address, the date, and the time. He made a single request: let me be there. The translator hesitated but finally agreed. One condition: no aggression, no public spectacle, no dishonor. Lao Shi agreed. On the morning of the meeting, he arrived early. The courtyard was small, rectangular, bordered by walls on 3 sides. By the time Bruce Lee was scheduled to appear, there were 20 people waiting. No one spoke much. Lao Shi stood near the center, hands behind his back, breathing steady. And then, just after noon, the gate opened. Bruce Lee stepped through the gate carrying a small canvas bag. He was wearing a dark collared shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. No uniform, no insignia. He looked like someone who had just come from a meeting. He was 30 years old, lean, compact. His movements were efficient, no wasted motion, no hesitation. The translator, Chen, greeted the small crowd. He apologized for the informal setting. He explained they were there to discuss script ideas, philosophy. Lee said nothing. He set the bag down and stood with his weight centered, hands loose at his sides. Chen gestured toward Lao Shi. He introduced him simply as a teacher, someone who has studied for many years. Lao Shi stepped forward. He did not bow. He looked at Lee directly and spoke in Cantonese. I have heard many things about you. I would like to know if they are true. Chen translated. Lee's face remained still. What would you like to know? I would like to test you. The courtyard went silent. Chen started to apologize, but Lee raised one hand gently to stop him. He looked at Lao Shi for a long moment. This is about learning or proving. The question hung in the air. Lao Shi considered it. He answered honestly. Both. Lee nodded. Okay. Chen tried to intervene, suggested a different time, a more formal setting. Lee shook his head. It's fine. He asked. I'll answer. He took 3 steps toward the center. The crowd adjusted, forming a loose circle. Li stopped about 8 feet from Lao Shi. He didn't take a stance. His feet were shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, hands low and open. Lao Shi recognized the positioning. It wasn't Wing Chun. It wasn't boxing. It was something in between, adaptive, non-committal. He didn't like it. It had no clear structure to exploit. He stepped forward, closing the distance to about 6 feet. He spoke louder so everyone could hear. "I will tell you what will happen. You will be on the ground in 3 seconds. Maybe less. If you want to stop now, I will respect that. But if we continue, I will not hold back." Li didn't respond verbally. He simply adjusted his stance barely. A minor shift in weight. Lao Shi saw someone refusing to commit to a defensive structure. It irritated him. He decided he would end it immediately. The straight punch, full speed, full commitment, center line to center line. He took one breath. He centered his weight over his rear leg, his right hand chambered at his side. His eyes locked on Li's sternum. Li didn't move. His gaze was steady, watching the shoulders, the hips, the places where movement begins. The courtyard was silent. Lao Shi exploded forward. Li moved 4 inches to the left, not a large movement, just a small lateral shift enough to let Lao Shi's fist pass through empty space where his chest had been. As the punch extended past him, Li's rear hand came up and intercepted Lao Shi's wrist from the inside, redirecting it further across. Not a hard pull, just guidance. At the same instant, Li stepped in. His lead foot moved forward and to the outside of Lao Shi's lead leg. His left hand open, fingers together, rose and stopped at Lao Shi's throat. Not touching, just occupying the space. Lao Shi felt it immediately. His punch had been extended into emptiness. His weight was committed forward. His base was unstable. He tried to pull back, to reset, but Li's hand was still controlling his wrist and the angle was wrong. As Lao Shi began to shift his weight backward, Li's lead leg moved a small hooking motion with the heel, sweeping Lao Shi's rear foot out from under him. It wasn't a hard kick. The monk's weight was already moving backward. The sweep just removed the support. Lao Shi's rear leg buckled. His hips dropped. And then he was on the ground. 1 second, maybe 1.5. Li released his wrist and stepped back. His hands returned to the low, neutral position. He wasn't breathing hard. He looked like someone who had just finished a routine drill. Lao Shi sat on the dirt, one hand braced behind him. He wasn't hurt. There had been no impact, no strike. He had simply been placed on the ground, structurally. The courtyard was silent. No one gasped. No one cheered. It had happened so fast, so cleanly, that many weren't sure exactly how Li had done it. Lao Shi stared at the ground. He had been completely, effortlessly neutralized, not overpowered. Neutralized. Li extended his hand. Lao Shi hesitated. Then he reached up. Li pulled him to his feet, one smooth motion. Once standing, Lao Shi spoke quietly. "You did not hit me." Li nodded. "You could have." Li nodded again. "Why didn't you?" Li spoke slowly so Chen could translate. "Because you didn't want to hurt me. You wanted to test me, so I tested you back." Lao Shi absorbed the words. He realized Li had read his intention before the exchange even began. The choice not to strike hadn't been mercy, it had been respect. Lao Shi bowed. A small bow, but genuine. Li returned it, matching the angle exactly. And then Li knelt. He lowered himself to one knee, in the same spot where Lao Shi had fallen. He gestured for the older man to join him. Li began to speak fragments of Cantonese mixed with gestures. He was showing Lao Shi something. He placed his own hand where Lao Shi's punch had been. He traced the path. Then he showed where his interception had come from, how the angle had redirected the force. He moved slowly, repeating it 3 times. Then he gestured for Lao Shi to try. They stayed like that for nearly 10 minutes. Two men kneeling in the dirt, working through the mechanics of what had just happened. Finally, Li stood. He helped Lao Xia. He picked up his bag and turned toward the gate. Before he left, he looked back. "Thank you for the question." And then he walked out. The gate closed. The courtyard remained still. They were trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. Not the technique, but the exchange. The fact that a man from Hollywood had just treated a traditional enforcer monk with more respect than most masters showed their own students. Lao Shi stood in the center, staring at the gate. He did not speak for the rest of the day. 3 weeks later, Lao Shi did something he had not done in over a decade. He asked for help. One of his senior students, Wei, noticed the change immediately. Classes had shifted. Lao Shi no longer demonstrated techniques and expected perfect replication. He now asked questions. Where is your opponent's weight when you strike? What happens if they don't resist? Some students left. They wanted certainty, the old way. But others stayed, and those who stayed began to notice they were getting better. Not just stronger. Better. More effective. Wei approached Lao Shi one evening. "Teacher, what happened to you that day?" Lao Shi stopped sweeping the training space. "I learned that I had been teaching you to fight ghosts." He gestured for Wei to stand opposite him. "Throw a punch, as you would in a real situation." Wei threw a straight right. Fast, committed. Lao Shi didn't move. He let it stop an inch from his chest. "Good technique. Now tell me, who were you hitting?" "You, teacher." "No. You were hitting the idea of me. You threw the punch you were taught to throw, but you didn't see me. You saw a target." He stepped to the side slightly. "Throw it again. But this time, look at where I actually am." Wei reset. This time, he noticed Lao Shi's weight, his positioning. He threw the punch and felt it. The moment his weight committed, Lao Shi shifted. The punch traveled through empty space. "You see? I didn't block you. I wasn't there. And you didn't adjust because you were committed to the technique, not the reality." He placed a hand on Wei's shoulder. "This is what Bruce Lee showed me. He didn't fight my technique. He fought me, the person. And because he was fighting what was actually there, he won before I even moved." Over the following months, Lao Shi restructured his entire teaching. He stopped drilling forms in isolation. He had students work in pairs, learning to feel pressure and absence, commitment and hesitation. He told them about the courtyard. He described what Lee had done: the shift, the interception, the sweep. But more than the technique, he taught the principle. Bruce Lee did not try to be stronger than me. He did not try to be faster. He simply made sure that I was always in the wrong place at the wrong time. And once that happened, the outcome was inevitable. One student asked, "Could you beat him now?" Lao Shi considered it seriously. "No. But not because I am weaker, because the question itself is wrong. Beating him is not the goal. Understanding what he understands, that is the goal." As months passed, word spread that Lao Shi had changed. Some saw it as weakness, but those who trained with him knew he had not become weaker. He had become wiser. 19 years later, in 1987, a journalist named Michael Tan sat in a tea house in Hong Kong, researching a book about Bruce Lee's life. He had heard rumors about Guangzhou, about a courtyard, about a challenge that ended in seconds. But the details were vague, contradictory. Tan had learned that stories about Bruce Lee tended to grow, to become legend, but this one felt different, because every person who mentioned it said the same thing: find the people who were there, they all tell the same story. Tan tracked down 3 witnesses. It took 4 months. He interviewed them separately. Didn't tell them he was speaking to the others. The stories matched. Same courtyard. Same 3-second claim. Same straight punch. Same 4-inch shift. Same interception. Same interception. Same sweep. Same silence. The first witness, now running an import business, described it. He moved almost nothing, just a small shift. Then Lao Shi was on the ground. But I remember what happened after Li knelt down and showed him what had happened. Explained it. The second witness, a Tai Chi teacher. Lao Shi changed completely after that. Stopped taking challenges, started teaching differently. People thought he'd lost his nerve, but we knew better. He had found something. The third witness, a former student. Lao Shi used to say Bruce Lee gave him a gift that day. Not victory, a question. What if everything you know is only half the answer? Huh. Tan compared the recordings. 3 different people. No coordination. The stories matched. Not just in outline, but in detail. He included it in his book published the following year. He noted that no photographs existed. No film. Just memory. But memory, when shared by multiple people across nearly 2 decades without deviation, becomes something more than anecdote. It becomes record. In 2006, a documentary crew traveled to Guangzhou. They found the courtyard still there, tucked between buildings. The dirt had been paved over, the walls repainted. They interviewed local residents. One older man said, "There was a monk, very serious. He stopped taking challenges after some encounter. Became a teacher instead." The crew asked if there was any marker to commemorate it. The man laughed. Why would there be? It was just 2 men in a courtyard. No cameras, no officials, just a conversation. He paused. Though people still call it that sometimes, the place where pride learned to listen. In 2018, 50 years after the incident, a martial arts forum hosted a discussion. One participant, a Wing Chun instructor, stood and spoke. I trained with one of Lao Shi's later students. I asked him why their training was so different from other Shaolin schools. He said, "Because our teacher learned that being right is not the same as being effective. And he learned it from someone who never had to say a word." 200 Sen Sem. Do you think it really happened? Exactly as described. The instructor shrugged. I don't know. I wasn't there, but the lessons survived. And lessons that survive 50 years without changing, those aren't just stories. Those are truths. The courtyard still exists. Unmarked. Unremarkable. Just a small space between buildings, used now for parking bicycles. But sometimes, late in the evening, people say you can still feel something there. Not a presence, just the echo of a question, asked and answered. The kind of question that changes you, if you're willing to hear it. In 1968, in a courtyard outside Guangzhou, 2 men exchanged something more valuable than victory. One learned that certainty is not the same as truth. The other proved that teaching does not require a classroom. And everyone who stood witness carried the same story for the rest of their lives. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was complete.